our learned speaker for the day, and we also welcome our audience. This meeting is primarily meant for having some very focused conversation on the recent budget that has been presented by the Honorable Finance Minister. While we would restrict ourselves some of the major policy announcement or the tax proposals or even the declarations that has been spoken as part of the finance minister's speech, but as always, we would not focus on the nuts and bolts of any specific points. So it's more for a broad insights of the learned speaker that is more desirable for the audience rather than seeing what is there obvious on the piece of paper. And as we all know that budget, at least from this year onwards, it has almost become a non-event, and that is as we go deeper into the conversation that we would clarify why we feel so. As India digest budget 2026, the real question before us is not just what the numbers say, but what the choices signal about India's economic direction in a rapidly changing world. And sir, this reminds me your latest book, and I was fortunate to be part of the book launch in Delhi at the Prime Minister's Museum and Library with the august presence of many dignitaries. It was really a lifetime experience for me. Grateful that you could spare some time, even we had a very brief flying interaction. And you have spoken about there are 6 simultaneous transitions in the world that is happening. So it is so relevant, and it is just maybe a couple of months before the budget, that book you published, sir. So in that context, it is very important that if you could just share some of the high points that is relevant to this conversation today. And to help us decode this moment, we are privileged to have you, sir, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, the former Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog, a distinguished economist and someone who has shaped economic thinking from the vantage points of government, industry, and multilateral institutions. He has been the Secretary General for the largest industry body in the country. He has been one of the longest serving directors of Asian Development Bank Manila, and then government after government he has been advising in different ministries, and then he has been part of the Bank of India Central Board. This conversation is an invitation to move beyond headlines. As I said in the beginning, we are not going to focus on specific allocations or deficits. No, it is more on a very meaningful interaction on the strategic intent, its reform credibility, and its implication for India's medium-term growth story. Dr. Kumar, with that broader context in mind, let me begin by asking, does budget 2026 mark a genuine shift in India's growth strategy, or it's an exercise in calibrated continuity, sir?
Good morning, Sabyasachee. Wonderful to be here with you. And thank you for your kind words just now. It's always a pleasure to be conversing with you. On the specific issue of the budget, I think it's a case of calibrated continuity, and that doesn't mark any decisive break from the past. I think the Honorable Finance Minister has once more relied on consolidating the fiscal deficit, trying to attain the FRBM norms, increasing the public capex to be able to push the growth forward and give some impetus to the manufacturing sector. I think a very important part of the budget was the announcement of 7 frontline sectors, the forward-looking manufacturing sectors, where since substantive allocations have been made to take India forward in these sectors, which are, as I said, frontline and sunrise sectors, manufacturing sectors. So that's one of the more remarkable features of the budget. Otherwise, the budget, with its largest ever public expenditure of more than 12 lakh crore, is actually going to lay very strong infrastructure foundations for the economy, which will help everybody and which will therefore help push growth up further. But as you notice, the budget assumes a nominal growth rate of 10% and a real growth rate of about 7.5%, which is the same as in the past years. So therefore, there is not that much of a break. But my own feeling is that a calibrated continuity, it's a good phrase that you have used, is far better than trying to risk a breakthrough which then may not come about. Because in this world of great uncertainty, it is the economy, its resilience, its stability, its macroeconomic, framework should remain as strong as ever. So I think the finance minister has taken note of that, but made sure that the Indian economy will continue to be on a higher growth trajectory and still remain one of the fastest growing large economies in the world. So, yeah, yes.
Thank you, sir, for having such a great opening, sir, as always. I think you have set the tone for the discussion for the next few minutes that we are going to spend together, sir. Your distinction, your views important and often missed in the headlines. I think as always, your response has surpassed the expectations, sir. Before we come back to the big picture, you are someone who have seen all sides of economy in different roles, and most of them are not just stewardship strategic role. You have headed even the operational, the functional role. It is a private investment which still remains subdued despite all that, and this has nothing to do with this budget specific. So it is in this context, especially leveraging your Niti Aayog and FICCI role. Does this budget, or not necessarily this budget, I mean the pattern that we have been seeing, are they doing enough to crowd in private investment? When I say other need for the deeper reforms in the factor markets and regulatory certainty, are you seeing the missing link?
Yeah, very good question, Sabyasachee. And the budget, for the last 3 or 4 years, they've been hoping that the increase in public capex, public expenditure, infrastructure will crowd in the private investment. But that unfortunately has not happened. The private investment to GDP ratio has actually continued to decline, is not rising. And that should worry everybody, because the private sector doesn't seem to be responding to the economic, if you like, stimulus that the government is putting out there. And the reasons for, in my view, the reason is that the major reason, as far as I'm concerned, is that the regulatory and compliance burden on the private sector, at least at the ground level, where people are actually facing the kind of difficulty that they face, that makes the investment climate quite unpredictable. And uncertainty and unpredictability are anathema to a private investor. The private investor likes a very clear road ahead, well-defined, transparent, without any twists and turns. And that's not yet happened. And the other fact is that a lot of these regulatory and compliance measures and burdens, which the Prime Minister talked about in his own 15th August address one time, and said that there were 64,000 of it, a large number of these exist in the states jurisdiction and the way the states work. So what I had suggested, and I want to suggest, is that just like the GST Council, there could be a council on regulatory and compliance, reduction, or better still, call it a council on ease of doing business in the country, and get all the state ministers on that council, and then get them to agree on a whole slew of license and regulatory controls being removed in a time-bound manner. And if once that's announced, then it will be, I'm sure the private sector will get attracted and will get encouraged. The other thing is that on the ground level, again, the operation of some of the agencies has remained quite opaque and uncertain, and people are therefore not sure of what could happen now. What could happen as a result of this. On the other side, however, there is a fact of massive digitization in the administration of income tax, corporate tax, and others, and that has meant that the funds are now much easier, much more transparent, and easily done. So that has been done, but the major impediment to attracting the private sector has been the regulatory and compliance cholesterol that is there in the system, and which is not letting the private sector feel confident about the result, about what will be the result of their investment, if they take it, and the time it will take to get it done, etc. So I think that has to be sorted out, and that will have to be done maybe outside the budget, because it's a major reform. You talked about the factor markets, and there that the government has notified the labor codes, and that will help in a major way. Now again, here we have to make sure that all the states follow some standard procedure and come to some common understanding about these labor laws and social security laws, etc. Because if there is a lot of variation across the states, that will also create confusion. So that's been done, which is a very good step forward. So I think just a mixed picture, but to repeat myself, time has now come for the government to become a government which promotes private sector rather than regulates it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I think message is very clear and very nicely you brought the role of states through a council. I think GST Council is leading by example as a perfect emblem of cooperative federalism that we almost take it as an article of faith as part of a constitutional mandate, and this has been working fine. I think not a single decision that has gone into vote. It's all unanimous decision. Recently, we had a conversation where that was changed, and one of our panelists he said it's more of a fiction. But anyway, individuals are entitled to their views. But I think by and large, there is a consensus in this country. GST Council is something that it's working. The not just objective, even the day-to-day functioning can be replicated. Somebody was saying that electricity council. I think that's an area of the power sector, so they're trying to bring that in. And then you rightly said the states have to be empowered and have to be held accountable for the reform because bulk of it they lead it. Absolutely, because once we moved away from the national plan panel, which you have been at the helm of affairs at some point in time, I think it is more accentuated, more pronounced today. The states have also equally major role. And just as a corollary to an extent, just to clarify my understanding, sir, while government and particularly central government can navigate it, I think there are others in the ecosystem, and I'm referring to the analysts, the media, and the so-called the independent thinkers. Somewhere, I think collectively we try and confuse the people the way they perceive the value creators, the entrepreneurs. At some point in time, we should start the deficit of trust that has been created for some time now. So I think we as a society, we should also learn to value and hold them with the regard they deserve, the people who are creating wealth for us.
Absolutely, Sabyasachee, you couldn't have said it better, which is that we need a societal mindset change. And a societal mindset change in the sense that the role and the importance of the private entrepreneur must be recognized. And they should be given the social status that they deserve because they create the wealth, they create the value in our society, in our country. And for centuries, they've been doing it. From millennia, they've been doing this. And it was them, it was because of them that our country, Bharat, was called the Sone Ke Chidiya. And people like Alexander the Great and Vasco da Gama and Columbus, they were attracted to come to our shores because India at that time had 27% of the world income. And that was all generated by the private entrepreneur. There was no public sector, enterprises at that time. So therefore, I think it is time to bring the private entrepreneurs back to the pedestal of our society, and give them the due that they give them the credit that they deserve. The other part, which is a corollary to this, is that now is the time to remove the mistrust between different stakeholders in the society. And the four stakeholders that I talk about are government, in the private industry, civil society, and the academia. And all the four have to be brought on the same platform to pursue the national goal of Viksit Bharat by 2047. And therefore, each stakeholder should consider itself to be accountable to the others and also to expect the others to help the stakeholder, the other stakeholder in undertaking his own task. So this coalition of principal stakeholders to achieve a common national goal, which is an aspirational goal and which will really is necessary at the moment for our country, I think is a must. So therefore, a trust-based governance, a trust-based societal private enterprise, which is due, and two, removing the mistrust amongst stakeholders are necessary conditions for India to achieve its own national aspiration of being Viksit Bharat by 2047.
Great, sir. The four pillars that you outlined. So today, in your current role, you are running an organization as the chairman of the Pehla India Foundation with an army of economic scholars. You are producing some phenomenal result. I have never been a formal student of economics, but some of the research paper I laid my hand on, and they're really scholarly pieces. Now, sir, you said these four buckets, they're very important pillars. In your view, very briefly, if you can just share your thoughts, that how effective interaction between the industry and the academia is actually shaping up in our country, because that is still not felt. It's not very palpable. For people in general, the impression is the academia and the industry, they don't interact in this country. That is why research, innovation, they happen in silos, so there is no direct application. So it is in that context, how do you see that?
The interaction between the industry and academia could be much, much better and much better, much more reinforced, self-reinforcing than what it is today. And I think here we can learn the example from the US, from the UK, where industry supports the Indian academic, their own academics, their research work, their think tanks in a major way. Our industry so far has not done that. And our universities also, therefore, are working quite separately from the industry, from the what, and as a result, the R&D undertaken in the universities and also in the private sector is much less than what it should be. I mean, you know that the total R&D budget in the country is 0.7% of the GDP, which is less in absolute numbers than significantly less than R&D budget of some major technology companies in the world. Now, this has to increase, and the private sector has to also increase its expenditure on R&D. And the best way to do it is in collaboration with the academia, with the universities, with the think tanks. And I think now is the time for the private sector, private industry to really review what it does and come together, come together with the Indian intellectuals and Indian academia, think tanks, to produce this kind of innovative way forward, the innovative results to take it forward. Now, very often when I approach the private sector, they say, people in this country, the institutions, universities and think tanks don't have the track record for them to be able to support it. Now, that's a chicken and egg problem. Because if you don't give them the resources, there is no way that they can have a track record. Because ultimately, all this track record is created by talent, by the talent that you have to acquire. And this talent, you have to compete for this talent. And to compete, you have all the big four, consulting companies working here. You have the World Bank, the ADB, which attract our talent away from us. So therefore, the private sector, I think it is imperative for the private sector to give the resources to the universities and the think tank such that they are able to compete for the talent. And once they are successful in doing so, then they can create an indigenous capability of producing the kind of research result that the industry wants, the government wants, and the society wants. And I think, therefore, this coalition of the industry and academia must be brought about and must be created. And I must thank you for raising this issue, because it's not often that I hear people talking about it, but it's time to put it strongly in the public narrative that the industry-academia collaboration is necessary, is imperative, and without it, the country will not be able to go far, will not be able to achieve its potential, which is there.
Absolutely. I think that's a very comprehensive response. What I failed to understand, at least the leading universities in India, they have enough representatives who have been advising the government, and irrespective of which regime is there to rule, but somehow that institutional interaction is still, we have to experience, and you put it very nicely. We are nearing the end of the conversation, and there are two more questions. In 2024, sir, you were kind enough to engage with me on a pre-budget conversation, and there you advocated for a simpler tax structure. And that was really well received by the government. And in the next two budgets, we have seen enough announcement in that direction. So how do you see, sir, we are on the right track, or there's still room for more simplifications? I mean, nothing specific directionally.
In the direct tax regime, so there are two separate parts of it, the direct and the indirect tax regime. In the direct tax regime, which comprises the corporate sector and the personal income tax, I think a lot has been done. And then this year's budget, the revision of the income tax returns and the forms, etc., has been made. It's been a significant step. And I must admit that I have not looked at the revised form, but the objective must be that the common taxpayer can understand and fill up that particular form without the assistance of a chartered accountant. And because that's the way it has to be, it must be. But I think there's, as I said, significant steps have been taken. It's all been digitized, so tax administration has become far more efficient. You get the refunds without, in a few months, if they are due. So that part has been taken care of. In the indirect tax system, you have the GST, which has been simplified. Now you've got effectively 3, 0, 8, and 0, 5, and 12. I would actually go towards a single GST tax rate sooner rather than later, because it's still a lot of niggly now. Why should there be three rates on different types of popcorn or different types of hotel rooms, etc. The concept of to bring a socialism thought process into the GST structure, I think is self-defeating. Let's all pay a certain tax, and then those who you want to help, you can be helped through direct transfers, which anyway be digitized. So that's one part of it. Further simplification of GST and a further expansion of the GST coverage to fuel, to energy. Now, both those things have to be done and brought under the GST regime, and a grand bargain has to be struck with the states so that they agree, because they see that as their source of revenue raising. But again, it complicates matters because there's so many rates going on there. There is tax arbitrage. So further simplification and an expansion of GST coverage, I think, will help to make the indirect taxes also as simple as they should be. In many countries, like UAE or Singapore, or or even in Europe, the single tax rate is a great help for
enabler for the compliance and the governance. Yeah,
it's a great enabler.
Absolutely. Thank you. Sir, any thoughts on bringing back the farm law? Because that's a very important piece.
I am not sure, Sabyasachee, that the farm laws which were repealed in 2021 can be brought back in the same form again. I think what you need is a huge paradigm shift in Indian agriculture. Indian agriculture needs to be transformed. 43% of our workers in that sector producing only 18% of GDP is just simply not sustainable any longer. They're very low. Our yields for cereals and grains is, I think, 1/3 that of the highest in the world. All that has to improve. So I'm a great votary for shifting towards non-chemical farming in this country and reducing the input costs for agriculture. And that's one part of it. The second part of it is that the fertilizer subsidy that we give to the companies, I think, should be now given directly to the farmers. The government has the entire data set for farming households. They know also their holdings, so they can actually make a direct transfer to the farmers for the consumption of fertilizers. That will incentivize the farmer to optimize his consumption of fertilizer, and she will use only as much as is required and not too much because it's so cheap. And with that respect, this transfer of subsidy directly to the farmer will be a step forward towards moving away from the very high dependence on chemical fertilizers and other chemicals, pesticides and herbicides, which are actually, in some sense, spoiling our agriculture in a major way. Our soil is in the ICU. Our groundwater resources have really depleted most distressingly, and they're continuing to do so. Our carbon is being pushed out in the environment. So to achieve nutrition security, because our food has also become less nutritious because of all of this. So we have to have the objective of achieving nutrition subsidy along with ecological subsidy. And that can be done. That's not possible that it can be done. And that's the objective for the farmers. So agriculture, they need a complete rethink, as it were, and a new paradigm for the farmers to understand that they also have a responsibility towards the growth and development of this country. And they have to be brought into the conversation, because this shift cannot be done top down. It has to be done bottom up by bringing the farmers into the conversation. And I think all of that is today required urgently. And the Prime Minister has been saying that. I was hoping that they will have a larger allocation for this in the budget, but I hope this will happen in the subsequent days, because Paramparagat Krishi Yojana requires as much support as we can give it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I think this is one of the more interesting reform idea that the subsidy channelization can happen, because today everything is digitized, so things are much better to implement. There was a general belief that disinvestment was a big omission. I mean, that's minuscule. So with that, a fragmented global order and the geoeconomics that is shaping policy, how effectively you see that we're positioning help as a reliable growth anchor, both in manufacturing and service, which we have been relatively doing better in this emerging global order, sir.
Yeah, so it's actually two very distinct issues actually. And let me talk about disinvestment first. The budget has a target of 80,000 crore this year, and also has the target of reducing the debt to GDP ratio to 50% by 2031, I think, and bringing it down by 1 percentage point this year. And that can only be done if you earn enough revenue to liquidate that debt, as it were. I think it's a very necessary step. When I was in Niti Aayog, I was a very strong advocate and votary for not merely disinvestment, but for privatization and for asset monetization. Because there's a large volume of assets which are with the government, which are inefficiently used. And and they are just lying there, and that can be much better utilized and much higher productivity can be achieved from them. So all those three steps, disinvestment, privatization, outright privatization, and asset monetization, have to be brought together, because only then will our debt to GDP ratio and in our debt servicing today, it accounts for 26% of expenditure, and which is a very large amount. And that keeps the cost of capital high in our country, which affects private investment. So that only when the government reduces its stake from household and corporate savings will the cost of capital come down, and those are the steps required for that. So that much for the as you like to say, the non-tax revenue, increasing the non-tax revenue for the budget. That's one part. The second part about the fragmented trade order, etc., is that now you can't take for granted a rule-based world trading order. Everything is bilateral, and because everything is bilateral, you have to work harder to create the competitiveness and scale on our own manufacturing sector that can make it globally competitive with each trading partner. India has signed so many free trade agreements. I was looking at it in the past. Not all these free trade agreements have been to our advantage. In fact, our exports have not increased in several cases, despite the free trade agreement. And that means that you have to increase the competitiveness and the scale. And I think to that extent, a review of the PLI scheme is now called for, so that we can make it more effective across the 14 sectors. And then the 7 sectors that the finance minister mentioned in the budget should also be looked at. So a much more active, robust, forward-looking industrial policy, which is implemented in consultation jointly with the private sector, is now required. And I think the sooner we do that, and the sooner the DPIIT does that, the better off we will be. And last point here is that, again, the medium and small enterprises are the backbone of our manufacturing and provide almost 30-35% of our exports. Now, we should again work with the state governments to make sure that this sector, which has not done so well after the COVID period, and therefore there has been what is called a K-shaped recovery, this sector becomes dynamic again and becomes vibrant again, because they will provide, when they become a part of the regional and global production chains, India will benefit a lot.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So this is the fag end. 5 years from now, sir, it's a long-term view, the big picture. Which element of budget, if implemented well, could you see being cited as a quiet but consequential reform in India's economic journey, sir?
For me, the most important will be the disinvestment, privatization, and asset monetization. To make the public sector far more efficient than what it is. That's one. And 2, agricultural transformation.
Thank you.
And I think both are equally important, so I can't prioritize either of them. And both have to be taken into hand.
I understood deeply that because India needs cash, and we should put our resources where it matters most, sir. So it has always been a masterclass to engage with you, sir, and we truly appreciate your participation in this conversation. Thank you for the perspective that reminds us that budget are not merely annual financial exercise, but policy statements about the priorities of the state, the trade-offs, and the long-term intent. So your insights help place Budget 2026 in a broader continuum, linking today's fiscal choices with India's aspiration of global competitiveness, inclusion, and global relevance. On behalf of our audience, thank you for sharing your time and wisdom, sir. And thank you to our listeners for joining us in this thoughtful exploration of India's economic path ahead. And really
Thank you.
appreciate, sir, your joining, sir.
Thank you, Sabyasachee. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.